Lately, I've been thinking about the introverted and extroverted functions deeper on it, the extroverted and the introverted phenomena, and how they relate to each other also in other aspects of our common psychology. It's just to entertain the ideas, essentially. What I found is that you have a phenomena called independency and codependency and interdependency or interdependence. That actually overlaps very well with the functions because the individual functions, like for example, introverted feeling, introverted thinking, and so forth, they are very independent in the sense that if I'm an introverted feeler, I'm going to feel more independent with my feelings, and maybe I don't want to really rely so much on the feelings of others. I will be more dependent on my own feelings when I make decisions. This is kind of true for all the introverted functions, while the extroverted functions actually overlaps very well with being codependent, essentially. You rest your confidence on the collective understanding of something. For example, extroverted feelers, maybe they rely more on the feelings of others to understand what's morally correct, for example. Like they may not so much go into their own feeling value system, but more so they listen to others and determine what is the right moral action to do based on what other people feel. So it's codependency on other people to make that decision. Independency, I think, overlaps very well with what we call self-regulation, and the codependency overlap very well with co-regulation. And these are regulation techniques that I think you can use in actually all the 4 dimensions, and makes sense with the functions, I feel like. The self-regulation theory is more of a sensory kind of the mother and the child, and like more the sensory part of what happens when we grow up and stuff like that. But I thought it was interesting to just explore this more in terms of the functions as well. That's kind of what it is. Like when you have an introverted thinking dominant person, it means he is very well adept at self-regulating his own logic, his own thoughts. If he finds himself in an environment, maybe there's a toxic groupthink in that environment, poor quality logic essentially, the introverted thinking dominant person will actually be able to self-regulate his thoughts. He doesn't really copy that groupthink or hive mind that much. Oftentimes we see groupthink and hive mind to be a bad thing, but the truth is that you only need a good, like if you have a good group of people with good logic, they can actually collaborate and basically co-regulate, if you will, that their thinking, like they can help each other regulate their thinking to a better, higher thinking. The introverted thinker is dependent on himself, while the group is dependent on each other. You could also say in a relationship with just 2 people, it's kind of the same. It's kind of that's also co-regulation as well. But you could say that this co-regulation in a relationship is more introverted than a large group regulation. So it's kind of bridging over to that self-regulation in a way, and more independent, at least relative to the society. It's still very individual. Let's say maybe the smaller the individual group that does the co-regulative thinking or co-regulation, let's say, the more is actually closer to self-regulation, if you will. So the ultimate like co-regulation, at least in a humanity scale, would be what the human species together are commonly thinking. That's kind of cool too, because if we go to the sensing part, which is extroverted sensing, right? We could say that since the extroverted sensing is a codependent sensing, that actually means that the extroverted sensing will be essentially common sense. And that's kind of funny, it's common sense. I found that when you take the introverted function and the extroverted function together, you will get this new concept that we call interdependence. which is commonly described as a good relationship dynamic to have in like romantic relationships, because it's not too extroverted and it's not too introverted. Change the gears. In a relationship, for example, the people will think for themselves, and then they can go together with a partner and think together, and then they can get away from each other again and think for themselves, and then they can get together again and think together. And if they do that all the time, it's going to be a very healthy dynamic to that relationship. You could say that more minds are thinking better than one, but you could say that the hive mind co-regulated thinking, the hive mind thinking, is also kind of one mind. So you can't only use the group think, because that's also one mind. You kind of understand that this is getting paradoxical, but that's what happens when you dive deep into these functions, because in a lot of ways the reality is paradoxical. So suddenly the groupthink will look like the one mind, and the individuals will look like all this, like the multi-mind, if you want. So that's how functions can blend into each other, and we usually don't like that in a theory, because in a theory we want it to be clear and clear to our logic and brain to just references and definitions. Okay, so I made that new word called interregulation, and I was thinking, okay, it's important to co-regulate and it's important to self-regulate, but the interregulation will be the mix between extroverted and introverted functions. So it's kind of the ideal balance, or you could say the ideal balance is to pendulate between introverted and extroverted, self-dependency and codependency, right? You pendulate between them. Also have some time where you only spend room in between, which is, maybe you can call that interregulation. In a real-time conversation, you regulate yourself and you regulate the environment or the social aspect at the same time. So if you find that maybe a toxic emotional mood environment, you can self-regulate individually with your, I guess, your introverted feeling. So you can give rise to introverted feelings that is of a better quality than the group has. And then you can feed the group with that introverted feeling that you have created on your own through self-regulation. As I said, just feed that into the group, and the group will pick up on that feeling. And if you are lucky, they will accept this new vibration into the group. It kind of depends on the group. Like if you're going into a negative environment and gives something positive, usually the group will reject it because it's a larger energy that they are holding. The same if the group is a very positive environment where there's love and healing going on. It will actually be hard for a very pessimistic and negative person to go into that environment without being affected. But it's possible. If they are very resistant to co-regulation, they can basically, if they want, they can hold on to that negative feeling without being influenced by the group feeling. And sometimes actually as an INFP, that's actually not that unusual, because the INFP struggles to connect with that co-regulative and emotional environment for both good and bad. I was thinking, I'm actually not sure if that is even possible. Maybe it's not. Maybe this because I didn't actually really think about this for a very long time. But I was thinking, what about the attachment style theory? Because the attachment style theory is similar in the way that there's something called avoidant people in relationships, and there are preoccupied people in relationships. So the avoidant person is a person that wanna run away from the relationship. They may want the relationship, but they are scared of being hurt. The avoidant person is usually the person that have this armor up around them, and they really don't want anything to get into that armor, because they are afraid of being hurt or being attacked or that, yeah, basically they are afraid in that sense. Their body system or their trauma system or coping system, if you want, is wanting to keep distance. Usually these people, they're not so comfortable in relationships because they are afraid of being hurt. While the preoccupied person will be the clingy person, which are afraid of losing their partner, so they want to chase the avoidant person. They will trigger each other's. Basically, it's kind of the same issue because both of them are anxious and afraid and fearful of being hurt. They just do it in opposite ways, if that makes sense. I was thinking that the same for the cognitive functions, because you have the introverted function and the extroverted function. They are the same in that the introverted function is avoiding the extroverted function, and the introverted function doesn't really want anything to do with the extroverted function, while the extroverted function wants everything to do with all the introverted functions around them, right? Just an idea I have. I'm not sure if it's accurate. Carl Jung is saying is that you will reach the individuation state, making yourself whole, once you integrate all of the functions. This balance between extroverted and introverted. Okay, so it might be wrong, but like if you have an extroverted thinking hero and an introverted thinker hero, would the introverted thinker be less concerned about what the extroverted thinking hero is logically gathering, while the extroverted thinker hero will put himself more into the shoes of the introverted thinker? Maybe they will then feel like they can help the introverted thinker by applying, I know what all of these other people are thinking and in the society and how things works systematically in larger or grander sense, and they will maybe feel like they can help the introverted thinker with his issues, the like logical problems in his individual thinking. So maybe they will be experienced by the introverted thinker as preoccupied. Let me help you, let me help you, let me help you with your thinking all the time, if that makes sense. While the introverted thinker is, please, I don't need help, please step away from me, move away from this coming from the outside, like all this non-relevant logic to him, or it will feel like that for him, right? And maybe I'm totally wrong about that, but it's an interesting thing to just entertain, so I'm going to think about it a little bit longer. Usually I think longer on stuff before I present it, so my bad. And yeah, you also have secure attachment style in that attachment style theory, and the ideal state, they say, because there is no need to flee and there is no need to be like too strongly try to let me help you, let me help you, let me be close to you. And just to add that as well, I think secure attachment can actually, it doesn't need to say that this is the perfect relationship. I think that's how the theory presents itself, but I just want to address that as well, because I think I can tell from my own experience, like the first like relationship encounters or situations for me is that since I didn't really want the relationship, I think it was more like I just wanted to try, like hope it works. I hope it works. Maybe I can learn to love her over time. Like I didn't really, I was a teenager, right? And a teenager doesn't really think so much about these things. My experience is that if a person doesn't really want the relationship, of course they will be insecure, because there is nothing to fear, there's nothing to run from, there is nothing to cling to, because you don't really care if you lose it, and you don't really care if you don't really need to run away either, because why run away? I think when we run away, it's usually because we are afraid or because it's very annoying or something like that. So my point is that someone that are secure in a relationship, I don't think it means that this is a healthy sign usually, or like, yeah, actually maybe usually, because I think if relationship really matters, it really is strange if there's no reaction to, oh, what if I lose it? What if the other person can hurt me? Like, if there's none of that, maybe the relationship wasn't really that important to the people involved in that relationship. But I think there is a healthy version of the secure attachment. So there is also, of course, if you are more spiritually developed, maybe, so you actually go for someone you really, really like, and you have learned how to not fear that they will hurt you, or fear that they will abandon you and vanish, and you can't find someone else as good. If we lose this fear, I think we will develop a secure attachment style, but this time that attachment style is basically based in being secure, but also really, really being in that deep relationship, that deep love that many of us want to have, right? Some person that really, really loves you and really, really care about the relationship, and that it is a big deal. It's like a family, right? And that to be with someone that I really can love and be together with in a way that feels significant for both of us. Yeah. And by the way, if we think about it, like, if there's a toxic person in a relationship, like abusive narcissistic person, of course they're going to be secure, because why would an abusive person run from someone or feel like they have to be with the person no matter what? Like, of course they don't care. They didn't care about the person in the first place. Maybe only the sexual part, right? I think in context with that, I think the same is kind of true for regulation, that regulation is really a neutral thing. So you can self-regulate in both a good way and a bad way. So if you have an introvert, actually in the introverted loops, that probably can turn into a negative self-regulation. So if the INFP is looping in FI-SI, I think it's going to propel some sort of negative emotion and make it stronger. To regulate your own emotion in the bad way, you just make it worse than it would be for someone else. It's a neutral thing. And the same is true for co-regulation, that you can really make that emotional environment in a place, like the mood in a place will be very bad if you regulate it into something bad. It's like if you have anxious people together, of course they will all of a sudden collaborate and make it even more anxious. Like the whole dynamic in that group will be more and more anxious because they are themselves collaborating, co-regulating. That's worsening of their anxiety. You can also get anxious people together that is motivated to elevate themselves above that anxiety. And how that will look like, it's more like, yes, they will put anxiety into that co-regulation at first, but all of them are together as a team, they are transcending, and in that sense they will get less and less anxiety because they are collaborating on how to make everyone less anxious, if that makes sense. But even so, if regulation is neutral, I think I just want to point out that I think having full power, even if that's kind of a positive or negative power, to have full power, you should master your ability to be independent and codependent and interdependent. So all of those three, if we can basically learn how to use all of them, you have this pendulum between independent and codependent, and you also have, maybe sometimes you want to hold yourself more steadily in the middle and do them at the same time, which is the interdependence, I would say. Then you really, really are connected with reality, if you want. Individuated reality, maybe. The only issue is that it's not enough. You also have to use that for good and not for bad. I think incorrectedness will eventually die. And what do I mean by that? if there is a society that is incorrect in all the ways we can be incorrect, if the morals are bad, their understanding of the soul and the higher good for everyone, if that is bad, it's kind of like a cancer situation. And that situation can still grow. It can be like a team of bullies just kind of destroying things and even becoming larger, maybe like the Nazi. But the thing is that in the end, it's going to erase itself, just like cancer does, because the cancer needs the organism, right, to survive. And if the cancer will be larger and larger, the organism will die. And that's why universally, overall, I believe that the love is the only ending. It's the only ending that can really be there. That's why I think even though this regulation is essentially neutral, it will still be about love in the end, because that's what will survive, really. I want to kind of just to give some examples on how does co-regulation look like in the MBTI context. The TE, extrovert thinking, is basically the co-regulation for groupthink and hive mind, and FE is the emotional mood in a place. So basically, we all know that when you attend a party or something like that, you will feel a difference when you go in there. There is a difference in your feeling, and you didn't make it yourself. So that's basically a co-regulative effect. You go into co-regulation, and you join in with the co-regulation. And Catronics actually goes so far to say that the extroverted feeling in that environment is a new person. In a way, you become a collective being in that scenario, according to Catronics anyway. You partially become that collective being. It's kind of like you're a neuron in a brain. So you are still your neuron. You're yourself as a neuron, but you become the brain as well, which is a different brain. Then you have NE. How does NE look like when it's co-regulating? And that's kind of hard to put your finger on, but the most easy to understand example would be brainstorming ideas, for example. So if people, like you have a group, are going to innovate and make something new, they are brainstorming ideas, they are making the sun and all of that stuff, and basically when they're doing that, they are co-regulating ideas. It's like they actually have a collective channeling of ideas, because in Catronics the NE is actually connected with metaphysics. So it's actually to birth something new. You birth something new by collaborating with people. That's basically what the NE co-regulation looks like. And then you have the extroverted sensing, which actually is kind of really funny, because it's like I got this insight the other day, and it's so stupid, but it's so smart. So it's like extroverted sensing, it's common sense. For example, yawning, it will trigger something in the other person, and that person will also yawn as a result. The yawning is basically infectious, because it's a collective sensory co-regulation between the senses, like mirror neurons, if you want. And we can also tie it to the Pygmalion effect, I think. And the Pygmalion effect is basically about the cultural or group belief systems and how it will affect the belief systems of the other people around them. It's the belief system part of the sensing, and it will make other people believe what each other believes, which will make this culture or group dynamic of believing the same thing, and that makes the people involved find a sense of common sense, right? They find the common sense in that group or in that culture, or let's say a tribe, for example, have their own common sense. And even the humanity at large globally does have this common sense belief system about how things is. That's the belief system aspect of common sense. You can also go even deeper than that into the instinctual common sense, and that's basically humanity is it's the humanity form. That's basically about extroverted sensing, in my opinion. I think why we see the extroverted sensing people often kind of want to challenge the human body in sports and stuff like that. This is just my like intuitive hunch, but I think they are essentially trying to evolve the human species, creating our physiological capacities. Why do we have this hand? Why do I have this hand? Why do I have five fingers? And how it works? And like, I think actually extroverted sensing is the movement that has made this possible. Like they wanted to challenge the organism to do something, to like transcend its limitations, essentially. It's the common human experience, basically. While the introverted sensing is more so the individual human experience. Okay, so let's look also into this magnetic field of the heart. That's a very interesting illustration we have here, and our thoughts and emotions affect the heart's magnetic field, which energetically affects those in our environment, whether or not we are conscious of it. And that's a very interesting thing, and I think that really applies to all of the functions. You have that like this area that overlaps with the electromagnetic field of the other person, right? And you can call that like place in the middle. The extroverted function is kind of contained there. And also, I think actually when you take two magnets together, they actually make a new one also. So you can also see like there's a new individual magnet emerging because those magnets are so close to each other. And that new magnet could also be considered something like extroverted feeling, or even a larger individual group being, if that makes sense, or a relationship, just like one-to-one, like here it's a relationship. And the relationship part is also a living essence in itself, if that makes sense. That's what Cateronics believes anyway. Emotion means energy in motion. So it's actually true that this emotion is going out in this bubble around us in like energy. And I know that because it happened to me in a spiritual experience. So I know that emotions around us is actually real emotion. The emotions exist in the environment around you. And that's why you can feel it.